Welcome to Citizens for Community Media here in South Bend area. This is Peter Helland. I have Dr. E. Michael Jones, Dr. Smith, and Mario Sims. For some of people here in the community, or maybe it's on YouTube, but we've been together before.
Right.
I think it was at your church.
That's correct. A couple times.
Yes. And I had Mike on the Israel show on his trip to Argentina, and he had written a lot on monuments. You know, the monument in Prague, when the Stalin monument, the biggest one, fell, and then he was seeing all the monuments in Argentina, and he was really thinking what monuments signify. And so in here, we had the Martin Luther King Theodore Hesburgh monument downtown that we were kind of involved in that, Bob and I. And so there was really no discussion locally on that in a forum like this that I know of. And now we have the Charlottesville incident, which really brings up the monument thing. So I think you definitely have something to say. We haven't discussed this prior, so we don't know exactly what we're going to say.
Right.
So why don't we let Mike just kind of say something?
Okay.
Because you kind of have the
Yes.
definition. I mean, the definition of monument. You know, just kind of what this is about.
Right. Monuments symbolize political hegemony. That's what monuments are there to do. So when I was in Argentina, they took me to the monument of the Spanish Christian kings. All of the heritage of the Spaniards coming over to the New World, bringing Catholicism to the New World, bringing civilization, bringing language, grammar, all this type of stuff, all symbolized by this monument that was created in 1936 at the high point of Catholic influence in Buenos Aires. You go there now, the hands of the priests are cut off, the faces are defaced. What you have now is a cultural revolution that's going on in Argentina. At the same time that the Archbishop of Argentina is now Pope. Pope Francis came from Argentina. At the same time, you have a cultural revolution of a sort like bare-breasted women attacking the cathedral in Buenos Aires, trying to burn it down. This type of warfare symbolized by the defacing of the monument. To get to South Bend, we have a monument of Father Hesburgh and Martin Luther King. Okay, there's a certain element of misinformation about this monument. They're talking about 1964. It's not 1964. It was 1966. And the big question is then, what is Martin Luther King doing in Chicago in 1966? First of all, what's he doing there to begin with? Okay, and a lot of the black people in Chicago during this time were asking this question because there were no segregated water fountains in Chicago. You didn't have to sit in the back of the bus in Chicago. It was a completely different situation. Dorothy Tillman said it best. I've quoted this before, but she said, down south, you was either black or white. You wasn't none of this Irish or Polish or any of this type of stuff. And in our conversation, you brought this up. You were from Chicago.
That's correct.
You understood the ethnic dimension to Chicago culture. Okay, he went there in 66 because Nelson Rockefeller had paid him $25,000 to go there. The Quakers have been dying to get him to go to Chicago ever since the mid-50s. What did they want to do? Well, they wanted to bust up the Catholic ethnic neighborhoods. That's what the story was, because they have been trying to do this ever since the end of World War II. Louis Wirth, the professor of sociology at the University of Chicago, the Rockefeller Institution, had come up with the plan of how we're going to change the Polish guy or the Italian guy or the Irish guy who lives in ethnic neighborhoods into a white guy. And how do you turn him into a white guy? Well, you move him into the suburbs. Yeah, and how do you move them into suburbs? You move the black people in. You get all these black people coming up from Mississippi. There's the monument, again, to this guy that got off the train. He's got his cardboard suitcase with rope tied around it in Chicago. So what we have here is a monument to social engineering. That's what we're talking about. Basically, that the biggest internal migration in the history of the United States was bringing black people up from the South and moving them into places like Chicago or any of the big cities in the North. The other side of the coin was you displaced the native ethnic population. You Americanized them. They're not Irish anymore. They're not Polish anymore. They're white middle-class people, and they live in the suburbs, and they watch TV, and they drive cars. And that was the whole story of that movement. And what you're seeing now, I think, is my opinion here about the statue in Chicago, a resurrection of this celebration of social engineering.
Now, do you mean the statue in South Bend?
South Bend.
Yeah.
This is a monument to social engineering. Okay? Hesburgh was an agent of the Rockefellers. We all know this now. He worked for the Rockefellers. He was on their board. His job, according to the Rockefellers, was to mainstream contraception and undermine the church's teaching. That's what his job was. He got paid by the Rockefellers to do that. He shows up in Chicago. He engages in an attack on his own people because those were the Catholics who were being driven out of the neighborhood. And there's Hesburgh siding with the people who were driving them out of their neighborhoods. The people in Marquette Park did not understand the purpose of Martin Luther King's visit. They were Lithuanians. They didn't even know they were white. And when he got out of the car, they started throwing rocks. He got hit on the head with a rock. You know, it was a violent confrontation. I bring this up because what we're seeing right now is once again the orchestration of racial violence. Okay? What is this monument in South Bend, Indiana? It is what the magicians call misdirection. What is the battle in Charlottesville about? It is about misdirection. What I'm saying here is my point here is we have in this last election an uprising against the status quo. And I don't want to get into Trump's personality or anything like that. It was a protest against the status quo. It was the people versus the oligarchs. And he got elected, and the oligarchs didn't like it, and they still don't like it. You know, whatever you say about his personality, they don't like it because it was the people of Indiana rising up and saying, we don't like the situation. Okay, what this is, in my opinion, is a re-engineering of the whole Trump story. And let's get it back to a narrative that we can control, which is basically the black versus white narrative. Now, I'm saying they love that narrative.
Of course.
Because, and I say what you see in Charlotte was a deliberate orchestration of racial violence on the part of the police, who should have been standing between the Antifa and the white guys, and they did not do that. They allowed this violence to happen, and I'm saying this violence was allowed to happen to distract us from the narrative that was successful in the past fall, which is basically the oligarchs versus the people. That's the real narrative. This is here to distract us from that.
Well, you know, I could speak empirically about Chicago neighborhoods. I'm 65 years old. My grandmother, who had come up from Mississippi with her husband and grandfather to work at Armor Star, because a lot of black people worked in the stockyards, the meat processing plants. So they get a job. Of course, now you want to buy a house. So she bought a 3-story building on the west side of Chicago, 21st and Harding, which was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. As a kid, and we moved there when I was probably like 2 or 3 years old, I can still remember Hasidic Jews and Yiddish being spoken. As I would walk down the street, the tension came, obviously, you know, we're not Jewish. We're moving into the, you know, most people resist change. And you know, when you're bringing people that, do you know, I mean, they're Jewish, we're black, we don't go to the synagogue, they don't go to our church, so ultimately there was some initial resistance, and then the Jewish people end up moving, okay? Later on, as I grew up in Chicago, going to the various schools, I had to go through, Chicago's a city of neighborhoods, and unless you live there, you don't really understand that. I would have to go through a Lithuanian neighborhood or the Italian neighborhood where, you know, the old Italians are out there playing bocce ball. You know, So you'd go through that neighborhood, you go through the Lithuanian neighborhood, and you'd go to school with all these kids. We had to learn a language in 8th grade. Now, I chose German, but that was this tapestry of Chicago. You know, recently, somebody were talking to me, and we were talking about a candidate for office who had used the N-word, and I was asked, have you ever called a white person a cracker? I'm from Chicago. We didn't look at the white population as monolithic, as white. We didn't see it as white. We saw, well, if you go to Mayor Daley's neighborhood, those Irish over there are going to probably bash your head in. You know, the Italians, if you go to this neighborhood, are probably going to be upset because you're in the that Chicago was territorial, but it wasn't this monolithic face of, you know, these are white people. You really didn't even think about that like that. You just knew, boy, you know, I wouldn't go in that neighborhood because it's Irish, or I wouldn't go in that neighborhood because it's this. But I mean, having said that, and I want to support what you're saying with the empirical evidence. I live that. So what you said is absolutely about Dr. King and that environment. It's absolutely correct. Now, you know, Chicago had issues, obviously, with the police department and, you know, housing and those kind of things, you know, redlining and those kind of things. But you know, Dr. King came and went to Marquette Park, which anybody in Chicago knew, you know, you didn't go to Marquette Park. These were brick workers. These were blue-collar people who were Lithuanians. I mean, you knew, you know, I went to high school on 63rd and 61st and Walcott, and you knew if you're going to get your head split if you go through this neighborhood because they're not white people, they're Lithuanians, you know, and they're not understanding you. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
It was a different dynamic for us in understanding. I don't even like to use issues with race, but it was more of a culture or ethnicity
Yeah.
that divided the city of Chicago. I'll just use it like that. Now, fast forward to South Bend and this statue of Dr. Hesburgh and Dr. King. You know, both of them, you know, are recognized for the things they did. My concern is this is a statute, and it's, you know, okay, so people admire the statue, but existing around it is injustice, inequality, racism, lack of access. So I think a lot of times people think they've done their job by, you know, putting a statute up and go, hey, these guys did great work. And you look around, I mean, the Mayor Pete Buttigieg tweeted Monday his opposition to what happened in Virginia, but presides over a police department that will have 5 black officers at the end of this year, which is the lowest level in just like forever. Okay, so my opposition is not directly against the statute. It's the statute convinces so many people, oh yeah, the mayor or the ruling powers, and this is all what happens with the oligarchy. They will give you something to cheer where you go back and, you know, it's like you're serfs. You know, the king calls you, you stand up, and he goes, and he takes the canvas off, the sheet off, and yes, there's Dr. King, and, you know, his father Ted, and you go, yeah, then you go back, you get on your ox cart, and you go back to your mud hut, and you look in the cupboard and see 2 potatoes in there. And you can't, I mean, how do you, like, get, you know, so you know, it's like Paul, I think, in Acts 17, when he goes and he says, you know, they have the temple of Diana. He goes, I see you have a statute for every god. Okay? These are statutes for every god, and it's a distraction because behind putting out a statute for every god, there was one ruler. And there's a ruling class in this country that holds the money, it holds the media, and I agree. I mean, that's why the opposition to President Trump, they have created a blockage in his ability to run government. Why? Because he's not beholden to them. But it's this artificial. They'll do it and then they say, "See, look what's going on here. You can't run government." I mean,
Is it part of it, there's a confusion on the civil rights? I mean, Bob, what do you think? I mean,
Well-
the
well-
word itself is being misused, or overused, or it's...
Well, the issue, like in this country, like there was a civil war fought, and the North won. One of the questions that was asked of General Robert E. Lee, would he support just a statue being built of him? His answer was no. And he said the reason he said no is that having a statue of him or of any other Southern general there, it would be a reminder there of what had divided the country, such that he himself did not want a statue of him or of any other Southern person in leadership during the time of the Civil War, and so so as far as statue goes, that's what Robert E. Lee thought, which was documented in a book there, and I can't recall the author's name now, but the statue of King in Hesburgh, this was a idea that people associated with Notre Dame wanted to do, and they got support of donations from people in the city and elsewhere, and the city gave them permission just to place the statue there. Now, for me personally, the statue just simply represents the idea of Father Hesburgh just supporting King during the marches in the South. You know, that's it. Now, the work that was done in Chicago, that's a quagmire of a problem that King should not have gotten himself into, and he should not have accepted the money from Rockefeller just for going there. You know, that's just my personal opinion. And also, when he did get there, he said, "I was never going back." You know, now. One of the reasons for going there was the redlining that was done, and redlining was a practice that was in place in every major city in this country, whether it's a southern city or a northern city. And also, there are people who control people by using the term white and black. Most people want to be recognized by their ethnic origins there, as being German or Spanish or French or Lithuanian, you know, there. On my first trip to Europe, one of the things I learned is that they want to know where you're from. They don't want to know what your color of skin is. Are you from Germany? Are you from Georgia? Are you from Indiana? That's what they want to know. Somehow the term white and black was put in place in this country merely to divide people, you know, and but I just want to make a point that for the leadership from the Confederate Army General Robert E. Lee did not want any statues just erected to acknowledge any of the Southern leadership during the time of the Civil War.
I have kind of like a really different take on Confederate statutes or any Civil War. Here's the reality. Whether we're sit here and say you guys are white, we're black, or African American, Irish, or whatever, the reality is black people would not be here if 90% or 95% of white people said we don't want black people in this country, or would have allowed the South to put forth its plan and slavery and all this. Slavery doesn't exist anymore. The reason it doesn't, hundreds of thousands of men died on the battlefield. When I see a Confederate statue or flag, I don't think in terms of hate. I think about the tremendous sacrifice that was made by white men to ensure the end of slavery. I mean, I'm not offended by a Confederate flag. It's part of our history. I mean, so are you going to decide whatever now is ugly and untrendy, we should tear down? I mean, the reality is America has an ugly history. I mean, so are you going to continue to use the Washington Redskins, which is certainly offensive? I can't imagine naming a team the Detroit Blackskins or the Chicago Whiteskins. Okay, but to me that would be much more offensive than than a Confederate flag or statue of Lee. But so I think this. I think, but this is like the Wizard of Oz kind of, if you can imagine it. Somebody behind the curtain is orchestrating this.
Right.
That to me is troubling. It's just troubling.
Well, should we say who it is?
Well,
Let's say who it is.
yes.
George Soros gave $34 million to Black Lives Matter.
and people,
What we have here is
two women who are a transvestite and homosexual, supported by George Soros.
What we have here is a continuation
Those are leaders.
of the Black-Jewish alliance that got formed in the beginning of the 20th century. The NAACP
Beginning with the
was a
NAACP.
Jewish
Of
organization. Marcus Garvey went to headquarters. He couldn't find one black person in the entire building. It was a Jewish organization. It was created to use black people as the avant-garde of the revolution in the United States, to create a slave rebellion in the South, to overturn the government, overturn the social order. George Soros is only a continuation of that policy.
Absolutely.
Now, what happened in the meantime, it seems to me, is we all started to get along with each other. Now, I remember going to graduate school. And I remember I'm going right through North Philadelphia. I'm saying, I don't have anything against these people. They don't have anything against me. I got hit on the head with a rock.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm standing there with blood pouring down my jacket. And the cop comes up and he says to me, "It's your damn fault. Any white guy who comes into this neighborhood deserves what you got." Now, that was then.
Right.
Okay? So now, I mean, my son lives in Over the Rhine, used to live in Over the Rhine in Cincinnati. You go to Findlay Market, people get along. This is like a thing of the past. Everybody's black and white, everybody's getting along, everybody's shopping, everybody's going along, and now suddenly you got this ugly thing coming back again. So just to give you an instance, my granddaughter is in Chicago last weekend, and some black guy comes up to her and calls her a white bitch. Now, this, I'm saying, is a direct result of George Soros paying these people money to resurrect the race war, and it's a direct result of what happened in Charlottesville. They're trying to resurrect race war because they like race war.
Well, his ultimate plan is to destabilize the government. I mean, he's gone on record, my understanding, to talk about. But then you add into this mix a guy like Tim Gill, who is worth $500 million, who said that his plan is to destroy the evil people. Well, the evil people are the Christian leaderships. Here, think about this, okay? Less than 3% of the population is homosexual in this country. Where do you get foot soldiers from to support them? Because they don't have the numbers. No. You go and you say, well, we're going to civil rights. Well, if everybody's getting along, you don't have a problem. So let's create a problem. Let's recruit all these black people to support us, as the mayor did Monday night. Stand there and say, I'm for civil rights. Dude, you can't be. I mean, look at the country. 54% black poverty, 24% black unemployment, $1.7 billion in public works contract, and 0 to black contractors. 75%.
He has redefined the revolutionary movement.
Of course.
It's now you have to support homosexuals.
Of course, but he's part of the oligarchy.
So-
This is a Rhodes Scholar.
That's right.
Follow this now. Cecil Rhodes. I mean, you certainly know his background and his
Sure,
history.
the empire builder.
Of course. I mean, you have to. This is not about being directed towards any race of people. This is in order. When a doctor, you go to a doctor, I got a problem, and he goes, well, I got to find the source. I don't just put the bandage over the sore. I'm gonna. Oh yeah, I can see right here. You got a hairline. You have to name names of where this is coming from. This is locally. The media is controlled. I mean, you do Monday night. They do a rally speaking out against racism, and that the words that were spoken by Jordan Geiger and some others, Kevin Hogarth, who's a wobbly, spoke out bluntly against the racism here. And all you see in the media is the mayor saying, hey, we're against racism, and you never hear from these other people. Why? Who controls the media? Who benefits from the separation of the races in this country? You got to look at that. Who controls the media? Who controls Hollywood?
But at a certain level, you have a conflict between two ideologies, right? You have the Christian worldview, then you have the other view. And slavery, freedom and slavery seem to be the issues where these two worldviews conflict. When they shut down public access,
Faith of our fathers.
we had,
right.
for those who are watching, we had a show for 6 months. I think it might have been, was it Faith of Our Fathers we had it on?
Faith
Okay.
of our fathers, beginning in 2007.
And I also had that show from Such Withdrawal out of 1 Timothy chapter 6.
Right.
But we hit a lot on the themes of liberty and slavery, and you ended up calling your church Doulos Chapel, which Doulos in the Greek is...
And I had some lady on, this is wild, you guys will love it. Some lady said, as an aside, and this guy names his church after slaves. Yeah. I mean, Romans 1:1. Paul Doulos. I mean, see, you guys, you've talked about rebellion in the show Israel a lot. You deal with rebellion. So we're dealing with, how did Jesus make it to the cross? Look at the rebellion.
What is the model for a Christian? Pope Benedict the XVI said, it's not Simon Bar Kokhba, the Jewish revolutionary. It's not Spartacus. That's not what what Christianity is about.
Right.
It's not about armed insurrection. It's not about rising up. It's about working down and making things better at the bottom and working hard. And it's like being leaven in a loaf.
Yes.
You start doing these good works, and there's a plan that God has that will take that and spread it throughout society. And suddenly you have this pervasively Christian culture where people are not, the default setting is not, let's exploit the hell out of anybody who comes in the door, which is the culture we live in right now.
Our church, Doulos Chapel, for 4 years, without any government funding, has housed, fed, clothed everyone, whether it's homosexual, whether it's black, white, while watching the government pay out hundreds of thousands of dollars for ineffectual answers, simply because the mayor is a homosexual who wraps himself up in a thin sheet of Christianity by going to a church that validates homosexuality. Okay, so Mike, you're right. Our job is to advance the kingdom, but advancing the kingdom in an environment where Satan is behind the screen, and you've got so many counterfeit Christians, hypocrites, I think is the Greek word for it, the mask that the Greek actors used to use, and, this is it, I'm really a Christian, while people are laying, as you drive to the studio, there are 30 men and women laying up under the bridge on a blanket. They used to have tents. The mayor said no encampment, so the mayor, who's a Christian, has blankets now a half a block away from our church with 50,000 square feet, but they can't give us any money to hire staff and house. But you give the Kras building you pay $126,000 to rent it for 5 months, and they admit that it was money down the drain. Ultimately, is what Paul says in Ephesians 6:10 through 22, I think, that this is a spiritual battle. But you have to know who the workers of an iniquity are, and you got to call them out, because so many masquerade as do-gooders. Barack Obama masqueraded as a do-gooder while he's lighting up the White House in gay pride colors. This is an insidious battle. And when you start naming names, people will call you everything: racist, anti-Semitic. When in reality, I'm a doulos. I'm a doulos.
It also creates an atmosphere of hostility. And so I'm sitting at Fiddlers Hearth. I play Irish music every Monday night. I'm talking to this hippie lady from Arizona, and I'm talking about, the atmosphere has changed now. Now that we have a homosexual mayor, I don't write songs anymore. I'm afraid something's going to happen. It's ever since we got a homosexual mayor. At this point, a guy comes over to me and he said, "Did you just use the word homosexual?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm a homosexual. I'm offended." I said, "You're offended, huh? Well, let me tell you something. I'm offended by you eavesdropping on my conversation."
Yeah.
But I mean, this is the type of atmosphere that this has created, where people, instead of let's get along with each other, you know what I mean, and common civility, you have people walking up to you on the street and telling you what words you're allowed to use because they feel empowered by our homosexual mayor to do this.
The same group that's looking for tolerance and acceptance won't accept you being not receptive to their sin. Do you understand what I'm saying? You want me to accept you, and I'm telling you, well, here's the thing. If I look at 1 Corinthians 6, if I look at Leviticus, if I look at Jesus talking about, the Sodom and Gomorrah, and I am a doulos. I can only speak what the Master has me to speak.
We don't have a choice, right?
But see, that's the point of Doulos Chapel. Sir, I mean, you come over, you're offended because I use homosexuality. This is the words that I learned from my master, and my master's offended.
Well,
that you've altered God's plan of Adam and Eve. It wasn't Adam and Steve. It never was. And I'm offended that you would do that to my Lord and Savior.
I was reading where Jesus said that the greatest man there ever was, except for those in the kingdom of God, was John the Baptist. Now, why was John the Baptist so great? For sure, in part, because he rebuked Herod and Herod's wife. He said, "You cannot have your brother's wife." And it says immediately she got it into her head, she wanted him dead.
Yeah.
And John the Baptist obviously knew that would probably be the case.
Sure.
So in Jesus' mind, John the Baptist was the one he looked up to. I think he was 6 months younger, right? I mean, as a man, he looked up to him. Here's a guy willing to tell the truth.
But here's where it is, guys. As Christians, the church ultimately is failing. These things are going on in this country because we've had a president in President Obama. I'm a Christian, but allow all the things that went on here. Okay, the reality is things that he's done has weakened our military, which is why I applaud what President Trump is doing to strengthen our military again.
You were a Marine?
Yeah, I was a Marine. And I'm a member of 15 Marine Facebook pages, and I'm telling you, everybody's applauding the fact that they don't have to worry about serving with transgenders again. Okay? This culture of sodomism, okay, was allowed to be spread by our government. And it's served to weaken our country and bring about a divisiveness. I mean, but the church is not standing as it should. It's not being John the Baptist.
Do you think?
You remember we stood at a church when the Supreme Court.
Yeah, right.
We stood and I mean, there were pastors that tell me, I can't do that again. I can't, you guys. Mike took heat. I had to defend Mike on Facebook pages. They had people calling him a racist, and I'm like, Mike's a Christian.
Yeah, it's so easy to be, they can call you a racist, but if you slow them down, you say, well, can you define that term for me? How do you define a white supremacist? Because some of these definitions are up for grabs, and it's really not fair.
Peter, I've never had a problem with, if you're Irish, if you're German, if you're Lithuanian, and you're proud to be Lithuanian, you're proud to be German, I don't have a problem with that. What people do is they make it a bad thing by saying that's white pride. No, you're proud to be an Italian or a German or Lithuanian or Belgian, as you should. That ethnicity adds flavors to any country, and that's what America's built on.
Well, ultimately, that's like saying I'm proud of my wife.
Yeah,
I'm proud of my family. I'm
but
proud
see,
of my dad. What's wrong with that?
But we go back to the oligarchy, the spin they put on that. Okay, they can't afford us to be a melting pot. That's not profitable. There are companies that made money during World War II that sold to both sides.
Well, what do you think? I mean, I've been studying the whole movement, strong movements throughout our history to amend the Constitution so that the Constitution...
Can I just say something? Because what needs to be, you brought it up, but I think it needs to be emphasized. The fact is that what is the purpose of this whole homosexual issue here?
Of course.
What is the purpose? Well, it's to distract us from the guys who are under the bridge.
Yeah.
Let's face it.
That's exactly
because if we're supposed to look at the gay disco lights on the river,
right,
and feel good about the rainbow when we're bathed in the rainbow light, and nobody's talking about the guys under the bridge.
Well, they're saying they're so caring, and let's fight for civil
But
rights.
the point is that this is part of the plan from the beginning. I was in Berlin, gave a talk in Berlin, first time I've been there in 35 years, and they had a gay mayor before we did. And the slogan was, "Wir sind arm, aber sexy." We're poor, but we're sexy. Now, what does that mean? Let's break that down a little bit. What he's saying here is that we had a tradition in Germany of paying high wages for skilled labor. The BMW, the Mercedes-Benz are symbol of this skilled German labor. What he's saying now is, basically, we're going to abolish that. And you're going to go to, and if you don't like it, the fact that you're not making a decent salary, go to the gay disco and forget about your troubles. That's exactly what Pete said in the interview in the New York Times. He said the good jobs are never going to come back to South Bend. And that's the same interview where he was anointed as going to be the first gay president. Yeah. That's his job. Yeah. His job is to distract us from real issues and getting us fighting each other on their terms. So we're divide and conquer.
And while the media covers up the realities of South Bend, see that's where the media plays this role. Okay, no one challenges Pete on the poverty, the unemployment, the 1.6 grade average that the South Bend High Schools.
That came up at the club.
I mean, in other words, we're going back to gladiator days, carry the football for us or the ball for us, and you have no hope of going to college. And besides that, we don't have high-paying jobs here for you anyway, so entertain us for 4 years, okay? Christians, now I don't expect the world to be outraged because the world's going to be entertained.
Right, no, we're talking about the Christian
but
responsibility, right.
But the Christians should be outraged at the condition that exists in this city, but so many Christians have their hands out, Mike, and they're willing to be bought out and satisfied. Instead of seeking first the kingdom of God, they seek first Pete. This is, he who has an eye, let him see. I mean, what is going on here is representative of what's going on across this country.
Absolutely.
We have sacrificed our morals. We have sacrificed the things that I believe that the founding fathers fought for when they came to this country and tried to instill. And of course, Ben Franklin said when he was asked, what have you wrought? And he said, a republic if we can keep it. Our citizens are not interested in being engaged. Plus, the media makes sure that they go to sleep.
But But that is why you have Citizens for Community Media. I mean, that's why,
Of course, well,
that's why we don't want to lose
Well,
this.
you have to now, and that's the thing about President Trump that I love. He quickly understood he'd never get this message out through the mainstream media. Never get his message out. Because the mainstream media he wasn't beholden to the oligarchy. So they weren't going to give him any time. And so what he did was he did an in run. And he started using Twitter and social media. That's the importance of this.
What did you think about, you saw that last interview he did? Did you see that? Where he said, well, should we tear down the statue of George Washington because he owned slaves?
Well, see, but they don't want to live. This is it, okay? The logic in saying that there was violence on both parts is true. I mean,
No, there's definitely some bad character.
okay, so, but they will say, well, and this is how, if you're not a part, if you're Pete, you can say the crazy things in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and no one will change it. They won't say, well, look at the unemployment, look at the poverty that you have in South Bend. They will never say that. But let President Trump make an honest statement, and they'll spin it to seem like, oh, this guy's racist, he's not caring. There is an insidious element at work in this country that the mainstream Americans, for the most part, just play the role of I mean, they're just lumpen proletariat.
Well,
Whatever we're told, that's what we believe, and we're going to do, and let's rush the White House and impeach this man.
From a Bible study point of view, where Paul was at trial, and he said, I've had a good conscience all my life, and the high priest ordered him to be struck.
Right.
And then Paul then rebuked him and spoke bad of him, and then the bailiff said, do you know who you just spoke against? That's the ruler, that's the high priest. And then Paul says, he quotes the scripture, you're not supposed to speak evil of a ruler of the people. And then Paul always taught that in his letters.
Sure.
But when we're constantly, whether it's Obama, constantly speaking evil of Obama, and now you got half the population switching, and now they're speaking evil of Trump. Christians should not be doing that.
You'll never be able to govern this country ever again now, because the standard is set. Standard is set. I mean, people did that to Obama. The governor of Arizona putting their finger in his face and saying, okay, I personally never supported Barack Obama. I mean, I have friends in Chicago who are business people who are black who gave money to him the first term and wouldn't do it the second term. Okay,
But we're talking about a principle.
Okay, but that's my point.
If we're having a Bible study and we're laying out Christian principles, we can't let them be violated.
No, you're absolutely right, because this is why we'll never have unified leadership in the White House again, because
That's a pretty serious
well, now, okay,
statement.
there are so many people that, I mean, the disrespect, like you said, for Obama was so strong. So then you had people say, well, they treated our president like that. We're going to treat Trump like that. On my Facebook page, there are people, and mainly black people, who will say, well, you didn't say that about Barack. I'm like, so every time I make a comment, then I have to go back. And so I start posting things that Barack Obama said that were just as disagreeable as someone else, okay? But so you've got the sword of truth. I mean, in Hebrews, it cuts both ways. And the problem we're going to have in this country, it's not that people are not interested in truth. They're interested in their party.
You know what?
Their party.
Oh, their party.
They're interested. I don't care what Donald Trump says. He's a Republican. All Republicans are bad. And you get people, I don't care what Democrats said. All Democrats are bad. As a Christian, my point is simply this. I don't support parties. I support platforms. And if the platform is a Christian platform, I'm going to support it. If it's not, I'm going to say it's wicked. Does that make sense?
Some said this. Mike made a good opening comment about just what statues represent,
Okay.
which points to the problem that we've had over over this past weekend in Virginia. Now the alt-right organization, they're planning to have those protests. They're in 9 other cities, and also there was a good comment made about Christians losing their moral compass, and also about the Christian leadership not preaching or teaching that the Christians should maintain their moral compass there. Now, I think that we should talk more about the statues there. We also should discuss more about why the Christian leadership fails to teach their membership about maintaining that moral compass.
Okay, the statues. These statues are a result of something called the redemption of the South. Basically, the South lost the war. They had a draconian military exploitative settlement imposed on them. It was called Reconstruction.
That's right.
And it was so draconian and so unjust that it created a reaction.
Yes.
The reaction was led by Nathan Bedford Forrest. It was the Klan, the
That's
Ku
right.
Klux Klan, which was basically guerrilla warfare to drive the Yankees out of the South.
That's right.
Okay, they succeeded. They succeeded. By the end of the 19th century, the federal government said, look, we've had enough. Okay, we're back. We're pulling out. We're leaving. And these monuments are celebrating that victory. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about an element of reconciliation that took place. The government was wrong. The government, whatever you think about the war in the South, my opinion was about tariffs and about, North wanting high tariffs. The South wanted to sell cotton to England and buy their stuff from England. It was two systems. You had radicals who radicalized the whole situation. John Brown was working for the Secret Six. There were people in the abolition movement who wanted a war.
Right.
They wanted a war. And these statues, okay, do you want to talk about the meaning of the statues? I think it was a statement of reconciliation. Okay, that, all right, we're ending the Civil War. We're ending the guerrilla warfare that we succeeded in driving it out. We're now part of the United States of America. We accept your hegemony over us because you backed off and stopped imposing what we felt was an unjust regime on us. Now the black people, okay, they were under the thumb, okay, and that's something that I think personally we could have worked this out over time, because as they used to say, down south you can be uppity as long as you're not close, down south you can be close but not uppity. In the north you can be uppity but not close. You know what I mean?
Right.
Well, if you're close, you get to work it out, I think. And if we're talking about people who are both Christians, obviously there was a lot of baggage, historical baggage, a lot of animosity, and I think it was on its way to being healed. And now, what do we have? We got another civil war on our hands.
Well, yeah, that's because now, and being a veteran, a member of a lot of veterans pages, and that's exactly right, because the sentiment is you're forcing something down our throat. You're saying, you're tearing down, something that we want to have stand. And you're creating now another conflict. But think about this. You go to Chicago and there's a statue of, you look at, well, let's say you have statue of a Union soldier celebrating a victory over the Native Americans of the Indian Wars. Are you going to tear those statues down? If you see, here's the problem. Here's a problem, okay? Your selective outrage is offending people to the point that you press people so far they will react violently. Because
we had a reconciliation here.
okay, but where did this?
It took 50 years after the Civil War, but gradually the nation sort of unified around common ideals, and the common ideals were people like, Robert E. Lee was a decent guy. Every man in the North would say he was a decent man. And he could have started the surrender at Appomattox was a deliberate repudiation of guerrilla warfare, and they abused him. They abused Robert Lee's trust. The Yankees abused Robert Lee's trust. I'm not a Southerner. I come from Philadelphia, But I'm saying that a Catholic textbook talked about the Civil War, and they made a distinction between the first Klan and the second Klan. They made a distinction between Nathan Bedford Forrest and the guys who ever ran this operation in Indiana. Okay? And if we're not able to make these distinctions, and we're not able to say, in spite of everything, they did come together, and I think that's the path we need to. Well, all of us have had problems with our past. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have problems.
That's right. Well, but the outrage is selective. We're not. People are outraged that the Native Americans were decimated, and that we still have monuments spread throughout our country celebrating their extermination. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, now, to your point about the church and the involvement, I really think the church's role here, what I try and do is, as a pastor, my intent is always to listen to both sides. I always like to quote Genesis 18 when Abraham was complaining to God, and God said, I'll go down and see. Until I listen to both sides, I can't make a decision. But I have to be willing to sit down and listen to both sides and be Solomon.
But Bob, you were bringing up the moral compass and all that. What are the issues if you were the head of a church? I know you're just a deacon.
Yeah.
But if you were directing the Bible studies and you wanted to say, let's talk about what I think is really important for us as Christians in America today, what are the moral issues that you think the church is failing in?
Well, the Bible, using that as our guide, does give two sides. That's the sinful way of doing things and the Christian way of doing things, such that there is one way to do things according to the Bible, which is the Christian way. Now, people compromise that, they compromise that based upon money, based upon influence, status in the community, or either whatever elements are used to get them to sway from that Christian way of doing things. Like the Bible says, thou shalt not steal. You don't steal. But it's okay to take a little money underneath the table. It's okay to cheat on your taxes. It's okay to do other things, So people also will say it's okay for me to publicly like what Mike does, but behind closed doors, I will tell my friends, no, don't do what Mike says. It's okay for me to go to the church, sit there and say amen, but then when I get home, I will not even think about the things I heard. I won't even think about practicing what the pastor has said. We don't, like the Christians have lost their way, there. And then after the Civil War, there was a period in which the North imposed non-Christian like laws on the South, and also the Civil War was not about slavery. It was about tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
It was a monetary issue there. Slavery then came about in the end, just when Lincoln needed something to convince the people in the North there that this is what the war is for, and also back to how the black people got over here. The ships which brought the slaves over, one of the ships was captained by a person who wrote the song "Just Amazing Grace,"
Amazing Grace.
and then he happened just to be Jewish, there, and just so everyone has a hand in how we got to the situation we are now in, just historically. But what are we doing at the current time just to make the situation better, And then that's where it is hard to find leadership that is trying to make the current situation better,
Well, you're very involved, and everybody in town knows that you commit yourself to being president at so many important things. But based on your perspective, and you've got a wide perspective of this community, what's the best thing for the church leaders to be pushing right now? I mean, just simple, normal, turn your cheek, love your enemy kind of thing, or is there actually where things that we can do?
Can't recall the specific passage in the Bible, but it does speak to a leader has to speak to the inequities that are going on in the community, or in the area in which the church is in. We don't find those Christian leaders or pastors speaking to those inequities, And also, not only do you have to speak to them, you have to do something about them.
Right.
Now everyone cannot be a Martin Luther King and then organize protest marches, there. But everyone can just identify what those issues are, and they can provide some scriptural guidance.
Okay, we got 1 minute left. I know we kind of steer, it wasn't strictly on the monuments, and there's so many subjects here. Mike, you started out with the monument ideas, or anything that...
Yeah, we have to. We are here to raise consciousness.
Yes.
And we have to. The first duty of a Christian is to understand what's going on, and then once you understand the truth, then you have to act. But you can't act unless you know what's going on. And you'll never understand what's going on if you listen to the oligarchs' media. It's always going to be misdirection to enslave you, and in this instance, it's misdirection to get us to fight each other. And that is not the Christian way. That is not the Christian way.
Understand that speaking truth to power has a cost.
Yep.
John the Baptist.
Yep. I think we're almost done here, but this is Citizens for Community Media, and we have a blessing here that we have an avenue
Yes.
to use the public access channel. And of course, you have YouTube, but the public access channel is another venue. And so we encourage people watching it here locally to support this channel. So I think we're about done, and I'm glad that you guys could make it.
I thank God. I thank God for this opportunity, because this is God made.
Okay.
Allowing
Amen,
truth
brother.
is God made.
Yeah, yeah.
Amen.
Okay, so till the next time on Citizens for Community Media.
Well, I wish I was in the land of cotton wool and